Sermon of the Week, Psychic, based on the book of 1 Samuel. "Keep your hands at your sides," the young woman said. "Sorry, please proceed," the tall man said up apologetically. "This isn't going to work if you keep interfering," she said. She then took a deep breath. "What does that mean?" he asked in a soft tone as he could muster. "That's a 4 of wands," she said softly. "What does it mean?" he said, raising his voice slightly. She put her index finger to her lips and said, "Shh." He lifted his eyes slightly, but she kept staring at the card on the small round table. "It doesn't mean anything." "But," she turned over another card. It was a queen of cups, she said. "Is that one all right?" he asked. "It means your queen has, how shall I say, fine cups." A wry smile creased his face as he nodded in the affirmative. He thought maybe these cards might be accurate after all. He was in a tight spot. He was looking for any help he could get. He remembered his mother would see a similar woman and always come back home much relieved and relaxed. She turned over several more numbered cards of various suits. "How many cards are there in this deck?" he asked, becoming impatient. "Easy, sir, easy. There are 78 of them," she said, drawing another card. "When do we get a card that means something?" She pointed to the face-up card on the table. He saw a picture of a card with what looked like a tall building of some sort on it. Before he could ask, she said, "That's the tower." "What's it mean? What's it mean?" he asked anxiously. She raised her hand above her head. "I noticed when you came in that you were quite tall, sir." "I guess I am," he said. "How tall are you, sir?" she asked, lowering her hand. "I guess about 6 feet 6 inches, he said. "There, you see," she said, pointing a finger at him. "The cards are talking, and they're talking about you." He shrank back, lowering his head. He coughed and cleared his throat, gesturing for her to proceed. She turned over another card. "Ah, the King of Coins. I think we are getting close to your answer. Are you not a king?" she asked. He was silent for a while, but he was so desperate to know his fate that he finally said in a low voice, "Yes." She stared intently at him, then drew another card. "That's the 10 of Swords," he exclaimed. "That means I'll win my battle tomorrow." "It may," she said, "but the meaning of the card often hinges on the next one or the one before. Let's see. You are a tall king, and will be going into battle tomorrow. The 10th of the month, isn't it?" A look of amazement crossed his face. Could it be? But his expression changed as he realized there were more cards needed to answer his question. She turned over the next card, a Jack of Swords. "What's that mean?" he asked. There was more angst in his voice now, and his forehead was dripping with sweat. "It usually means a relative of yours will be involved." "That's it. My son Jonathan will be leading one of my divisions tomorrow. I can't believe it. This really works." He suddenly realized he was not exhibiting a kingly demeanor and shrank back into his quiet shell. She drew another card and stared long and hard at it. Now her forehead began to sweat as she stared at one of the 22 trump cards in the deck, number 13. She realized that this king, whoever he was, would not be pleased with an adverse tarot reading, and realized her days might be numbered. She slowly laid the card face down on the table. "My king, would you please turn it over?" He reached for it with his trembling, sweaty left hand and slowly turned it over. He stared down at it, and suddenly the room began to spin. He slumped forward, hitting the little table, and then fell to the floor in a dead faint. The card lay on his face, chest up, face up. Israel was still a fledgling country in 1100 BC. It had been 350 years since they marched through the Red Sea and on into infamy and glory. Their leaders had always been what they called judges. For whatever reason, they had never chosen or crowned a king to consolidate them into a real power in the Middle East. At this time, Eli, a priest, had assumed the role of judge. He was a reasonably good judge, but the Israeli army continued its warring ways. As Eli grew on in age, he decided his 2 sons should take over and be the next judges of Israel. Both were very corrupt, unlike their father. The Israeli people realized this and began to turn against them. In the small town of Ramathaim, 5 miles northwest of Jerusalem, there lived a man named Elkanah. He was a bit of a complicated fellow, having 2 wives, Peninnah and Hannah. Peninnah was fertile and bore many children, but Hannah was not. This circumstance led to many problems. Possibly feeling sorry for his unfertile wife, Hannah, he showed her a lot of favoritism. The jealousy and hatred created a less than peaceful household, but somehow the threesome kept working things out. They would sometimes pilgrimage to Shiloh, some 20 miles north, where the tabernacle and the ark were located. In one instance, the distraught Hannah prayed to God that if he gave her a child, she would dedicate it to God. Eli overheard her and laid his hands on her and blessed her. As you guessed, Hannah was soon pregnant and had a son who she named Samuel, meaning heard of God. Samuel became quite a young man, and Eli took a liking to him. As a teen, an event happened that would change Samuel's life forever. The Philistines, Israel's archenemy from the coast of the Mediterranean, took the Israeli army to task at Ebenezer and routed them. Eli's sons died in this battle, and the Ark of the Covenant was captured by the Philistine generals. When Eli heard this news, he was so overwrought he suffered a heart attack and died. Interestingly, the Philistine nation began to suffer plagues, famine, stock market crashes, and military defeats elsewhere. Lo and behold, 7 months later, they marched into Shiloh, deposited the ark there, and returned home. Samuel now took over the reins of Eli, and for the next 20 years ran the country. As he began to age, he looked for a successor and decided his 2 sons were the right ticket, but they were as corrupt as Eli's sons had been, and the Israeli people voted not to appoint them. The cry now went up from the congressional floor, "We want a king." The debate was long and loud, but finally the Congress voted to appoint a king to rule them and strengthen their military and consolidate their loose-knit nation. The debate on the Senate floor with accompanying filibusters accomplished nothing. Finally, one old senator spoke up and said, "Let Samuel decide." If they would agree with his choice, they could then vote to appoint the new king. Samuel, who was in attendance, agreed. Soon after, Samuel noticed a tall man in the land next to his home wandering around and calling out. The tall man was searching for some runaway livestock. Saul's servant suggests they consult the psychic or prophet known as Samuel. Soon the two met, and the rest is history. Within a few months, Saul the farmer is proclaimed the first king of Israel. Have you ever been put into a position of authority and had no training or idea what to do with your newfound authority? History is littered with this exact scenario. The slave Joseph was suddenly thrust into the office of prime minister in the superpower of Egypt. He prayed to his God and ran with his office to great success. The reluctant Moses was given the task of leading a nation out of bondage. First he killed a man, but eventually was successful. George Washington was a general, and by his skill and perseverance he pulled off one of the greatest victories in world history, defeating the strongest world power at the time, Great Britain. This achievement, along with worldwide fame, mandated to the United States government that he be their first president. The Revolutionary War wore him down, and all he wanted to do was live in peace and quiet at Mount Vernon. The Congress voted unanimously to elect him the first president of the United States, and after much consideration he reluctantly agreed. His honest methods, skillful selection of his cabinet and advisors, and his superb insight set the United States on the correct course to become the world's leading power and champion of democracy. Napoleon, the Corsican, had no idea he would someday rule the world, but the French Revolution and various circumstances thrust him into becoming the ruler of France. What did he do with it? Once he ruled France, he decided his way of governing was best and decided to enforce it on Europe and eventually the rest of the world. His downfall was as rapid as his ascent. He vastly underestimated the independent spirit of man. Edward Albert Christian George Andrew Patrick David was born in 1894 as the son of King George V of England. It is interesting to note that most kings don't have last names. In any event, his father died on January 20, 1936, but Edward VII never really wanted that job. He hated the stodgy protocol of the court and fell in love with an American, Wallace Simpson, who was in the process of getting her second divorce. The scandal was the leading news story of the time. Edward would not let his new love go, and by December 11 abdicated the throne for his love, who he would later marry. He was succeeded on the throne by his brother King George VI, who, as the movie The King's Speech so marvelously depicts, was even more reluctant than his brother to rule. Is it any wonder that the British Empire was totally unprepared for Adolf Hitler and World War II? Ronald and Nancy Reagan desperately wanted the presidency, and after several unsuccessful attempts, Mr. Reagan took office in 1981. In the latter part of his second term, the unthinkable happened. Mr. Reagan began to demonstrate signs of memory loss. Nancy and his advisors shielded him and kept the government on track. Nancy assumed more and more control, according to reports, but she was unprepared to run the most powerful nation on earth. What'd she do? She used all of the advisors, but also is said to have relied significantly on her astrologer, Joan Quigley. Other reports indicate she took part in seances. True or not, America somehow rolled along into the 90s in one piece. Having seen such examples in history, if we are put in a position of authority, how do we react? What do we as humans do? The answer is as diverse as the dictionary. The majority of us will seek assistance from friends and colleagues. Some will hunker down and study in an attempt to determine how to lead in our newfound position. Some will speak to other people in similar positions to get their advice and input. Some will attempt to shield their incompetence by becoming difficult and even ruthless to their subordinates. Some will literally become dictators, literally striking fear in their subordinates. Seldom do they thrive in that position. Many will pray to their supreme being of choice for assistance. Success may or may not be forthcoming, but a modest percentage are very reluctant. Some will resign their new position. Some will simply do nothing to enhance their company. They will just smolder away in their office and soon be fired. And some will do just enough to keep their new job, but when even this approach becomes difficult and all else seems to have failed, they may choose to turn to the occult. They watch their horoscope on a daily basis and often make decisions by what their horoscope tells them. Of course, even flipping a coin to make a decision will allow you to make the correct decision half the time. If their horoscope-based decisions are not working out very well, they may seek a higher power or authority, or may, I say, a lower power. They may use a Ouija board to get the correct answers. You can even do this online today, or they may ask their medium if they can speak to their dead relatives. Surely the father of a rich uncle will know what to do. If all else fails, they can choose to speak to the evil one himself, Lucifer. He most certainly will have all the right answers. Maybe about their mundane little job, he will. But as with any information, there's always a price. And no one charges more for information than the supreme loan shark, Lucifer. He has and continues to lead human after reluctant human down the path to permanent destruction. His price is not listed in dollars or shekels or euros. His price is not listed in cars or homes or diamonds or pleasure. No, his price is simply listed on the contract as one life. And when you sign the contract, you have signed away your life, your soul, your very existence for all time, for eternity. Even the memory of you will fade into oblivion. Revelation 21:4 says, "And God shall wipe away all tears from their eyes, and there shall be no more death, neither sorrow, neither crying, neither shall there be any more pain, for the former things are passed away." John says no one will be having regrets about the past or pain associated with losing friends and loved ones. He says the former things are passed away. They're wiped clean. Our memory will only be looking forward. Dear friends, the only reminder of the evil past of our earth will be found when we finally get to the front of the line and shake the hand of our Savior, Jesus Christ. That will be the only reminder we will ever have of how evil was. I know the line will be miles and miles long, but I will never be happier than when I have that privilege and honor of shaking the nail-scarred hand of the man from Galilee. Well, let's see how our buddy Saul's getting along. Oh yes, I failed to mention Saul's New Testament counterpart, Saul of Tarsus. You all know how reluctant he was, but you also know there was no more dramatic turnaround in world history. He changed from murderer to prophet in a split second. Of course, the God of the universe had a hand in that. But as you know, Paul could have said no to his God, just as millions of humans have done and continue to do. With all the information at our disposal about history and science and technology, it boggles the mind to believe anyone could not believe in the true God and his unfailing goodness. Once again, back to Saul of the Old Testament. He was of the tribe of Benjamin, the smallest tribe in the Israeli conglomerate, and just a farmer. He took pains to point this out to Samuel, but Samuel said God would have none of it. So Saul finally consented to be king. Though reluctant at first, he soon grew into the role and began to enjoy it. Wine, women, and song 24/7. He gained some military victories and made some popular decisions through the years, but pretty much sat on his laurels. He had a nice family with many sons. He had quite a bit of contact with Samuel, the prophet laureate of Israel, but their agendas frequently clashed. Saul preferred his own methods, and the two often clashed. Finally, things came to a head after Saul had waited for a week for Samuel to come and bless his army before going into battle. With no Samuel, Saul took it upon himself to offer his own sacrifices, disobeying Samuel and God himself. He later attacked the Amalekites, who were originally descendants of Esau and lived in Moab. But with Israel's relaxed borders, a nomadic segment of the Amalekites had moved into the now very fertile land of Israel. God wanted them and their evil influence out of Israel and ordered Saul to destroy them. But Saul liked some of them, so he warned a certain segment, the Kenites, who were coppersmiths, that he and his army were marching on them. The Kenites escaped, and Saul also preserved the choice livestock along with the Amalekite king. Samuel and his God had had enough. Samuel chastised Saul and told him God had chosen a new king to replace him. The conflicts between Saul and his newly chosen successor, David, are well documented in the Bible. As Saul ages, he realizes his days probably are numbered, but he likes his sumptuous life of royalty and doesn't want to give it up. News reaches him that the Philistines are again mobilizing their army and will likely march on him soon. Saul heads north and west to meet the Philistines head-on. He sets up camp on Mount Gilboa, a ridge of mountains overlooking the Jezreel Valley from the southeast. The high point is 1,629 feet above sea level, and from this vantage point Saul's scouts can see the Philistines advancing through the Jezreel Valley from the northwest. Where else have we heard of this Jezreel Valley? Of course, it's the site of the great and final battle of Revelation 16:16, Armageddon. The fort of Megiddo is on the valley's south rim, and the town of Nazareth lies 5 miles across the valley to the north of Megiddo on the valley's north rim. Mount Gilboa is 10 miles east of Megiddo and 15 miles south of Nazareth. It is fascinating that so much of our planet's significant history takes place in such a small area of land. It's like the red spot of Jupiter on a much smaller scale, always a hot spot, always conflict. The day was hot, and dust clouds kicked up by the Philistine army were soon high in the sky. Saul surmised the Philistines would probably camp for the night at the bottom of the mountain and then advance on his well-entrenched forces on the high ground the next morning. But as usual, Saul was wrong. The massive cloud just kept on coming up the hill. Saul ordered his men to make ready for defense, which they did, but the dust cloud continued its ascent. As it came closer, scouts could now see that this was no token force. The scouts estimated that the Philistine army to be some 20,000 men, likely their entire fighting force. Saul was commanding 5,000 men. The Israeli army had the high ground, but were outnumbered 4-1 by a more determined force with physically larger soldiers. They swept up the slope of old Mount Gilboa, but when they neared the top, they were met with a strong resistance. For a while the battle hung in the balance, but soon then Saul heard a whistling sound, and then another, and then another. Soon he realized the Philistine archers had found their mark. Saul was pulled from his perch. He had one arrow in his upper left chest, another in his groin, and a third in his left thigh. He wasn't sure they were fatal and ordered his adjutant to take Saul's sword and kill him lest he be captured and tortured. But the adjutant would not follow the order. Somehow the king got to his feet, held the tip of his sword against his own chest. His last vision was that of the psychic from Endor across from him and the death card staring up at him from the table. He pitched forward. Death was instantaneous. The moral of the biography of Saul is obvious, or is it? Saul was born into a good family. He was blessed with good health and a tall physical stature and was said to have superior intelligence. Everything was going his way. He was comfortable in his nice little life. Easy street. Many of us are blessed with such and like our little life just as Saul did. But what we don't realize is that there is a big harsh world out there. That world is in a constant struggle of good versus evil. Many are oblivious to the real world or don't want any part of it, but what at least half the world also doesn't realize is that God is in control. He despises the world and its evil ways more than anything in all the universe. To that end, he is doing everything in his power to abolish evil once and for all. So he searches for people who can help him in this struggle, and when he finds such an individual, he gives them a call. He gives them a presentation and demands an answer. Will that person help him in his fight? Can he put them in a position of higher authority and then expect them to join the battle? The answer he is given varies from a flat-out no, I don't know, to maybe, to yes, with qualifications, to a resounding yes. To even those with the weakest of positive answers, he will give a new position. To the homeless, he will locate a job. To the prisoner, he will arrange freedom. To the sickly, better health. To the low-level worker, a management position. To the struggling student, a doctorate. To the athlete, a championship. To the politician, a Senate seat. To the character actor, as a starring role into the billionaire presidency. Then the fun starts. What will these people do with their new status, their new life? History tells us that some will turn and join the evil force, allowing disease, corruption, violence, and lawlessness to proliferate. At the opposite end of the spectrum, some will join the fight and to the best of their ability advance the cause of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But what of the rest? The vast majority is silent. They won't give their God a straight answer and sail along in their nice little life. With repeated presentations, God is able to sway some to join his fight. Saul was part of this silent majority. He had a nice life and didn't want it disrupted. He knew of the unrest in his country of Israel, but figured others could take care of it. But God saw something most didn't. He realized Saul could do something good for the country. In fact, Saul had the talent and drive to do great things for Israel. After multiple presentations from Samuel, Saul finally caved and allowed himself to be crowned the first king of Israel. He now had the opportunity to stamp out graft, corruption, warring, idol worship, child sacrifice, and all the other atrocities occurring in the loose-knit kingdom of Israel. Initially, we are told Saul's reign was right on point. He destroyed some of the evil peoples living in Israel, had a nice family, and followed the prophet Samuel's advice. But as time went on, influenced by the evil rampant in his kingdom, he began to widen the path. The Bible spends a lot of time discussing Saul's reign and how it turned away from its initial good record to one of suspicion, corruption, and complete ignorance of its own constitution. Modern psychiatrists have diagnosed Saul with mania and depression, but I believe they are too kind. Saul has no excuse for his actions. He knew exactly what he was doing. He led Israel down a path which would have most certainly destroyed Israel as a nation forever. The Philistines would have retaken Israel once and for all. The Hebrew nation, the only one that actually chose God, would have been wiped out. No more prophets, no more 10 Commandments, no more priests, no more Messiah. The consequences are unimaginable. Take some time to study the life of Saul. It might be very familiar to you. How Saul was born into a comfortable life, how God hunted him down, how reluctant he was to leave that life, how his initial intentions were good, and how uncertainty and disbelief in his God led to his downfall and nearly to the demise of the entire Israeli people. Fortunately, God always has an ace in the hole. The next card in the Psyche of Endor's tarot deck was the King of Hearts. Just like Noah of old, God still had one human being that could stand in the gap. His name was David.